Hello again everyone, welcome back to the channel and to my Christmas special. So yo, Saturnalia. And 2,000 years ago, that was the seasonal greeting across farmsteads and markets and forts all across the Roman Empire. They didn't shout Merry Christmas, they didn't shout Happy Holidays, but yo, Saturnalia, a shout of joy marking the arrival of Rome's most famous midwinter festival. In a world without Christmas, without weekends, without winter holidays as we would recognise them, Saturnalia stood apart. It was noisy and indulgent and chaotic and joyful. It was a festival where the social norms were turned upside down, and for a few days in December, life was very different indeed. So join me today as we explore Saturnalia. To understand Saturnalia, we first need to understand how Roman festivals worked. And Roman festivals could be private affairs, such as family rituals or funerals, or they could be public ones, organised by the state. Public festivals were divided into three types. First we have stative, which were festivals held on a specific date every single year. Then we have conceptive, which were movable festivals, and then finally we have imperative, which were held to mark specific events, such as military victories. Saturnalia was part of the first group, stative, events that came about on the same dates every single year, and amongst that group, Saturnalia was one of the most popular. Festivals were incredibly important to the Romans. Life could be hard, regimented and relentless, so whether you were a soldier, a labourer, a slave or a farmer, festivals gave you a rare opportunity to have a break from work and routine, and the Roman calendar was full of such festivals, but Saturnalia stood out amongst the crowd. Saturnalia was held in honour of the god Saturn, the Roman god of farming and agriculture, and it probably started as an agricultural festival, marking the end of the planting season, a natural spot to pause, reflect and celebrate before winter properly set in. Saturnalia seems to have been celebrated from at least the 5th century BC, and it was originally held on one day, the 17th of December. But as Rome grew more wealthy, more powerful and more confident, the festival expanded. By the late Republic and Imperial period, Saturnalia ran from the 17th to 23rd of December, and several Roman emperors did try to restrict the number of days of Saturnalia, but by the 3rd century AD it had been formally recognised as a 7-day festival. It was greeted with a cry that became synonymous with December: Yo, Saturnalia! Interestingly, to the Romans, Saturn was more than just a harvest god. He was meant to have ruled over the land during a lost golden age, where the land had abundance without labour, where there was no private property, no slavery, no rigid social hierarchy, and Saturnalia was designed to reflect that world. So for a few days, every single year, the Romans returned to their mythic past, where the social norms were suspended, not abolished, but deliberately relaxed, so that people could imagine what life would have been like before wealth and status and power divided them. Saturnalia began on the 17th of December with a public religious ritual. A pig was sacrificed at the Temple of Saturn in the Forum in Rome, and then there was a public banquet. And at this public banquet, a statue of Saturn would be put in a reclining position on a couch, and a table would be put in front of it, and it would be piled with the same food that everyone else was enjoying. Most significantly though, Saturn's statue in the Forum in Rome was unbound during the festival. During the rest of the year, its feet were tied up with wool, a symbol of restraint, but this was removed during Saturnalia. And this symbol of liberation set the tone for everything that would follow. Saturnalia was also a public holiday, meaning that businesses and the courts had to shut. And as night fell, the city would be lit up with candles, and celebrations would continue well into the night. One of the most defining features of Saturnalia is, of course, role reversal. On the first day, households would choose a Saturnalicius princeps, the Lord of Misrule, who would be chosen by throwing dice. And their role was to oversee the festivities and to issue absurd commands that had to be obeyed. For the duration of the festival, social norms were loosened. Slaves could eat with their masters, and in some cases were even served by them. Free speech was permitted, slaves could joke or criticise their masters without fear of punishment. And the poet Horace describes this as December liberty, whilst the poet Catullus describes Saturnalia as the happiest of times. But freedom had its limits. Everyone knew that the normal state of affairs would come back eventually, so it would take a particularly brave slave to take a joke too far. Saturnalia also influenced people's choice in clothing. The traditional toga was put aside in favour of the synthesis, coloured garments that were deemed normally unsuitable for the streets of Rome during the daytime. Everyone could also wear the pileus, a felt cap normally reserved for freedmen. Slaves could also wear them, so at least on a visual level, everyone seemed equal. Other people would wear masks, and others would engage in roleplay. So for a few days, the visual markers of status were blurred. Gambling, which was normally restricted, or at the very least frowned upon, was openly permitted, with dice games taking place in houses and on the streets. Overeating and drunkenness became the norm rather than the exception, and shouting, singing and dancing filled the streets. Not everyone enjoyed Saturnalia, however. Pliny the Younger, famously intolerant of noise, retreated to his villa during Saturnalia so that he could continue his studies in peace. An ancient reminder then that some people, even in Roman times, just like to opt out of the festive chaos. As the festival continued, other days picked up other meanings. The 19th of December was dedicated to Saturn's wife Ops, the goddess of abundance, and her festival, called the Opalia, focused on plenty, prosperity, and the earth itself. And during her festival, feasting would often take place on or near the floor, showing her connection to the soil and to the harvest. Throughout the week, households would decorate their houses. They would use greenery, especially holly, which was sacred to Saturn. They would put candles on household altars, and they would also drape across doorways and windows garlands made with red berries. The final day of Saturnalia, the 23rd of December, which was called Sigillaria, was devoted to gift giving. These gifts were deliberately modest: small lamps, combs, purses, candles, cheap pottery, and wax figurines, all things that people could afford, so as to not highlight social differences. The wax figurines, which were also called sigillaria, were sold in specialist markets and also along Roman roads, such as the Via Sigillaria, and seasonal fairs would crop up in Rome, filling up public spaces with more shops. Some Romans believed that these objects were merely toys, especially for children, whilst others saw them as substitutes for sacrificial offerings to Saturn. It is worth noting at this point that Saturn was not an entirely benevolent god. He has links with death and the underworld, and later sources would claim that Saturnalia used gladiatorial games in December as a means of human sacrifice for Saturn. Saturnalia was not confined to Rome. You could celebrate it anywhere in the empire, particularly where you found the Roman army. For a Roman soldier, festivals in the Roman calendar were some of the rarest opportunities to have time off from duty. But celebrations would be varied. Garrisons in the Roman army would be made up of people from all over the Roman world, and they would bring their own traditions and customs. In Britain, evidence is scarce, but not entirely absent. At Vindolanda, near Hadrian's Wall, one of the Vindolanda tablets is a message from a slave called Severus to another slave called Candidus, asking him to acquire some radishes for Saturnalia. It's a small detail, but a powerful one. It tells us that Saturnalia was celebrated on the northern frontier of the Roman Empire. And it also raises practical questions. Imagine trying to get radishes in the middle of the winter in Northumberland. We don't know how Saturnalia was celebrated in Britain, but it's likely that it adapted to local conditions whilst maintaining its Roman core. Saturnalia took place near the winter solstice, when the days were at their shortest. And although Saturnalia ended on the 23rd of December, celebrations continued. The 25th of December was also marked in Roman calendars as the birthday of Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun. So it would seem, for the Romans, December was party season. Of course, the 25th of December is now the traditional date for Christmas, but the Bible doesn't actually give a specific date for the birth of Jesus. But by the 4th century AD, Christian authorities decided to adopt the 25th of December as Christmas Day. This was not a clear replacement for Saturnalia. It continued informally for centuries. Traditions blended rather than disappeared. Gift-giving, candles, evergreen decorations, singing, feasting and games, they were all part of Roman winter celebrations. Saturnalia was a joyful and chaotic time and deeply Roman. For 1 week every single year, everything was turned upside down, allowing the Romans to experience ideas of equality and abundance and freedom, even if only briefly. So this Christmas, when you light your candles, exchange your gifts, eat too much and raise one too many glasses, remember, you are partaking in traditions far older than Christmas itself. But thank you very much for watching. I wish you all a very happy Christmas. If you want to give me a Christmas gift, please like and comment on this video. And if you haven't already subscribed, please make sure that you do. And I'll see you all on the next one. Ciao for now.